Welcome to Series 2 of my podcast, Stories of Unconscious Bias. I'm Smita Tharoor. In Series 1, I had the great privilege of hearing stories of unconscious bias from some wonderful people about a wide range of topics. I laughed, cried, and was moved in equal measure. I started this series because I wanted the listeners to realize that we are not alone. All of us have similar stories. They may not be the exact same, but when we hear them, we can hear the parallels in our lives. My speakers have all shared their learning and how they manage their unconscious biases, which is also a wonderful life lesson for us. Series 2 will follow the same style of interview. I hope you enjoy listening. I'm really lucky today because I have got a very interesting person I'm looking forward to speaking to. I've got Dr. Bhasha Mukherjee. Bhasha is the current reigning Miss England and NHS frontline worker in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm very grateful that Bhasha has taken time out to talk to us about the unconscious bias. Welcome, Bhasha.
Hello. Nice to hear from you as well.
So, Bhasha, unconscious bias, that's what we're talking about. What do you understand by that?
I understand that there's quite a few different forms of it, and it's something that we're not aware of, but we form opinions on the basis of it, and our actions sometimes are based on this bias, and it's sometimes it can be positive, and other times it can be negative. That's all I can say.
That's great, because very often when we think of the word bias, we're often thinking of the word bias in a negative way. And you're so right. It could be positive or could be negative. And of course, it's unconscious and you don't know. But when I was introducing you, Bhasha, I was automatically having my own perhaps unconscious bias jumping in, because I'm looking at these two words written next to each other in front of me: Dr. Bhasha Mukherjee, an NHS doctor, and the current reigning Miss England. And perhaps, and I could be wrong, many people might look at these two as an oxymoron, as one is contradicting to another, because surely a medical doctor who's out there working with patients cannot be the same person who comes on stage and represents the country in terms of beauty and other aspects of a front-facing, a different kind of front-facing skill. So I just found it very interesting that I've had the privilege to meet you, and you are both. So it could be that other people have similar unconscious biases. And I'm just wondering, when we talk about unconscious bias, what kind of stories can you share with us?
I think I'd like to start with my own unconscious bias that I had, going into Miss England. In a way, I wanted to, exactly do what you said, break the stereotype of people assuming that, beauty pageant queens are just beauty without any brains in a way. And it was a very conscious effort of mine to try and fit into both boxes, because growing up, I used to, get bullied at school for being a geek. And, I knew that I had to change that narrative and, in a way, become more appealing, to be sort of more appealing to both the worlds, the smart people and, the current youth and stuff. I decided to go ahead with this particular route in my life. But, in terms of my personal unconscious bias that I had, I remember going into the Miss England competition, being told by my organisers, because we have regional organisers who take part of all the semi-finals and stuff. And they literally said, oh, just go take part. The Asian girls never do well. That's literally what I get told. And I basically got told, you're not going to win because the Asian girls don't do well. And I remember being at the competition and confirming this bias. Every time I felt low, I sort of resorted to this story in my own head, which I was, confirmation bias, which was I kept thinking, oh, it's because I'm Asian, it's because I'm not white or Caucasian. Every time there was all the different rounds, quite a large majority of these rounds were won or being won by, girls with blonde hair. A lot of the girls there were with blonde hair, lovely skin, everything, and Caucasian, standard Caucasian girls, except for, the clearly objective rounds like the vote count or amounts raised for charity. Most of the girls that were winning the rounds were Caucasian. And in my head, even till the very last, like, top five, I knew for sure that it's going to be a Caucasian girl, and we knew who it was going to be. It's going to be a blonde-haired girl. And I had basically had a confirmation bias for the whole competition, and I had assumed through the whole thing that it's set up, it's clearly racist, and they're never going to make an Asian girl win. That's how I was thinking. But of course, I got proven wrong, and um, I am here in front of you as Miss England. So that's the
That's
story.
delightful. That's delightful, Basha, and thank you for being so honest with your own early upbringing, and of course later the Miss England story. Just kind of for my own understanding and learning from what you've just shared. Growing up, I mean, we have to state facts for facts. You won the Miss England because you are a very beautiful woman. And for those of you who don't know, please do Google Bhasha Mukherjee Miss England, and you will appreciate what I'm talking about. But growing up, you would have had the good looks, but you were known for being a geek because you were a bright child. You were working very hard, and it's very interesting that you made this conscious decision. See, very
Mm-hmm.
often we can hear stories about children being bullied, and how do you work with that? Because this is being bullied, being called a geek, and being made to feel lesser than as a child. And so many of us who have been bullied would will know what you've went through at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
many of us may not have had the inner strength and courage to turn it around and say, hold on a minute, yes, I'm right. Yes, I want to be a medical doctor. But guess what? I'm going to use my other assets too, rather than hide that behind a bushel. And it's also very interesting that you talked about blonde girls and white blonde beautiful women with lovely skin who you assumed would win. And very often there's a stereotype about blonde women not being bright, and I can bet you there are many blonde women who are extremely capable, bright, and more. But just because of the color of their hair, there is an expectation that that's all they're about. And it's interesting because you did not feel, because you are of South Asian descent. For those listeners who don't know, Bhasha Mukherjee is a very much an Indian name. In fact, I would guess that her parents are Bengali.
Mm-hmm.
But equally, Bhasha Mukherjee is a British citizen, born and brought up in England, and therefore should be no different to anybody else. But because of what the people were saying to you, the organizers round by round, you started believing what they were saying. So it's actually really interesting that these two stories that you began to believe in, confirmation bias, as you so wisely put, and so you kept looking for reasons not to prove themselves, and prove yourself wrong. Surely I'm not going to win. So tell us a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. I want to visualize you there backstage when it was announced. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I had assumed pretty much that it wasn't going to be me. I I could see from the girls that were winning and doing really well in the rounds, they I just had this feeling that, oh, it's going to be a Caucasian woman who's going to win. It was really difficult for me because I opened the show because I reached top three for the talent round, and the talent round was the very first thing to be shown on stage, and I opened the show, and there I was doing Ghumar, which is a Bollywood song in my Bollywood outfit. I felt so low about myself. I had no family members in the crowd, and a large part of the crowd was Caucasian in Newcastle, and I just felt so low. I just knew that, well, I know it's not going to be me because how is anybody in the judging panel going to be able to um, understand anything about the dance I'm doing or anything like that, So I kept thinking through each of the rounds that it's not going to be me because of these reasons every time. And right up to the top six, I remember I was really happy that I reached the top six and I had a chance to at least say what I wanted to say because that was a question and answers round. And I knew that, you know, if anything, I reached top six and I gave an answer that I wanted to say, and that's how I saw it. And we were all holding hands backstage, and we were all sort of pointed to the girl that we thought was going to win, a blonde-haired, beautiful woman, and we were all going to, we were all supporting her, saying, "You're going to win." And then they said my name. I literally, I literally said, "What?" I, I was in so much disbelief when I came onto the stage. I couldn't stop crying on stage and thinking about my family and everyone whose blessings that were with me. But it was completely a shock to me.
It's just so beautiful, this story. And I mean, I'm there with you backstage, and also in the audience watching you do the dance, the Bollywood dance in your Bollywood outfit. And what is so powerful, the story that you've shared, it's not just about you being Miss England, because for us listeners, those of us who are born in another country but are from another origin, say an Indian like you and I, certainly I was born and brought up in India, but my children, like you, are born in the United Kingdom, in London. And there are so many people like you, Basha, whether they're Indian or Pakistani or Nigerian or any other
Mm,
nationality, where they are born in London to parents from another country, and they're
mm,
confused about their own identity. And they're
mm,
not sure that this country that I technically belong to will even see me for what I am, will even
mm, mm,
understand what is Bollywood, what am I doing on stage, what is the strange
mm,
outfit I'm wearing. And this
mm,
self
mm,
belief, that's what I'm hearing from your story, which I think is fantastic. And I hope the
mm,
listeners are also taking away what I'm taking away. This idea of self belief and identity when you are not white and you are born in a country that is predominantly white. And how do we see ourselves in terms of our identity and our culture, and yet fitting into two different cultures?
mm.
Some fantastic, powerful stuff there. Plus, of course, I can see you standing at the back with your mouth wide open, thinking, "Good Lord, did I really win Miss England?" So,
Yes.
congratulations on that. Brilliant, really brilliant. So, and of course, I mean, on a more serious note, we're speaking at the moment when the COVID pandemic is taking over the world.
Mm,
And you're also extremely busy doing your Miss England duties
mm,
alongside being a medical doctor. Tell us a little bit
mm.
about that and what kind of unconscious biases have you gleaned from there?
So, I'd say, of course, I get a lot of support from my co-workers, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic being in the hospital that I work at, which is, you know, um, it's just a hospital. Nothing too exciting happens there, as you can imagine. Hospitals are hospitals at the end of the day, and it's in a small town that I work at. And of course, from the very beginning of my journey as a doctor, I feel it was almost through rose-tinted glasses that I had my whole journey, because I won my crown the night before I started my job at my hospital. So for me, I think my first job has been almost sugar coated because of the lovely appreciation and the little comments that I get. It's especially the nurses and the cleaning staff and the food, the lunch ladies, the dinner ladies. They recognize me, and they say things like, "Can I have a picture with you?" and stuff. So of course, my whole experience as a whole at the hospital of being both Miss England and a doctor has been largely positive. Um, but it does come with certain negatives in the way that there's extra scrutiny of everything I do, which I don't feel it's fair sometimes. That why should I be scrutinized and my actions be so scrutinized when some of my fellow colleagues might be raising similar concerns? Just to give you an example, of course, with COVID-19, some of the things that have come up is staff members not being happy with PPE, some of the government policies, things like this. And there have been other staff members who openly talk about it on their social medias and other platforms, and especially even in the corridors and elsewhere. I'm sure they talk about it in their homes, but there's been an extra scrutiny, and you know even to the extent of like the big bosses getting involved with anything I would say in the media and trying to sort of make sure that I say the right things. And I understand that they have to obviously protect the image and thing of the trust of the NHS and all these things, and I am a public figure. But it sometimes does make me feel like that it's unfair that I get scrutinized so much for my actions because I am a public figure in Miss England, you know, and therefore my rights as a human and as a citizen are sometimes in a way overridden, because I have to really watch what I say and I can't have that freedom of speech that I'd like to. Do you see what I'm saying?
Entirely, yeah. And it's really, if we use the word unconscious bias, it's about the people, the senior employees in the NHS and the hospital that you're working at, and how
Mm,
their own unconscious bias are kicking in.
mm-hmm,
And it's this. I mean, I'm making it up. Perhaps I'm wrong, but it could be that their unconscious bias is suggesting that you are a public figure. Um,
mm-hmm,
and it could be true, in my opinion, not just a public figure, but a public figure is also, in terms of winning a beauty pageant. And
mm,
therefore, are you good enough to be trusted? Yes, you've passed the exams. Yes, you've become a medical doctor. I'm entirely
mm,
making it up, and I may
mm,
be wrong. But so they're
mm,
thinking and looking at you. You were looking at work with rose tinted glasses, but they're looking at you with different kinds of glasses, wondering, will this person do the job that all other medical doctors will do because of the
mm,
experiences that she has had,
mm,
in not just in the public face, but specifically for the fact that you won this England. I do wonder. I'm just throwing it out there, and
mm,
all of us listeners can have their own opinion and thoughts, because that's the beauty of unconscious bias. It's our stories, our narratives that will impact without us even realizing.
mm,
But tell us more. Can you share some more stories about either working within the NHS or perhaps something else personal, where you've recognized unconscious bias?
Yes, I was really thinking about this unconscious bias, and because I knew we were going to talk about this today. And the thing about unconscious bias is that so often it's unconscious. It's really difficult to really, reflect and think about times when we have been unconsciously biased towards situations. Of course, I can think a myriad of situations in the past throughout growing up. Of course, I'm sure you might have experienced this yourself, that at the workplace or at school and stuff, you sort of gravitate towards people of the same ethnicity as yourself or even the same skin color. And even if they're not, then, something that you have in common with them, which for me, I've had a great relationship with with Pakistanis, with African people, Nigerians, and Jamaicans. Well, because it's that, the ethnic minority commonality that we have, and that's obviously a given situation. But more recently, I'd say we were doing a Miss England Heat. So this was before COVID. We were doing some of the semi-finals. We were doing some elections for them. Girls were coming in for auditions. We were selecting candidates to go forward to the semi-finals in a way. So I didn't have an active role in choosing the participants or the people that would go forward. But for me, I did look at a contestant with more liking, let's say, than others. And that's because she was an NHS nurse. And as soon as she said, oh, she's a nurse and she's an NHS worker, my face lit up. And I think, in a way, the organizers must have also drawn that parallel between, the current winner is an NHS worker, and, the national pride that goes with it, with working in the National Health Service and stuff. I realized that yes, I was unconsciously biased towards this girl. I just saw her as kinder and all these things because I knew she was a nurse. And I'm not sure if that's always a bad thing, because when we think of someone's profession, we sometimes instantly draw certain, assumptions about them. That might not always be true, that all nurses and all people that work in the NHS are kind, lovely people. There's, of course, exceptions to the rule. But to me, I think a person's job does say a lot about them. especially to get into a field like nursing or medicine, you have to show certain traits to even get through in the interview process, or the, the various different field, tests that you have to do. So I think there's both a conscious and an unconscious bias that I had at that point.
That's delightful, and I mean both aspects of the story that you just shared is something that I've certainly researched and read about, which is called social identity theory.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what these two gentlemen who did the research way back in the late 70s, what they're saying is that we in modern society, we instinctively, implicitly, what we do
Mm-hmm.
is we identify, we categorize, and then we
Mm-hmm.
compare. And
Mm-hmm.
so, essentially, what you were doing with both examples, when you were growing up, and how you instinctively, without realizing it, veered towards friendships and making friends with people who were of the ethnic minority, whether they were black or whether they were South Asian, it didn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
but they were not white. And it just, without even realizing it, you just felt more comfortable. So you were
Mm,
identifying and categorizing, and then, of course, you were a group. And similarly was profession. So whether it's a color of skin or gender or profession or religion or anything, we do this. Football teams, whatever. We without realizing it, we either warm to somebody or a situation. It could be a person or a thing, or it could
mm,
be the opposite. And so when you heard that this lady was a nurse, it was entirely instinctive. So that's entirely true about unconscious bias. And we all do it. And I'm sure our listeners are thinking, oh golly, I
mm,
do that. I do
mm,
that. We we all do. We can't help ourselves. It's just how it is.
mm, absolutely.
But but so you've had some fun learning, I bet, both within the hospital and within your year of being Miss England, because I imagine you have to travel and do, in inverted commas, good work to represent the country. Am I correct? Because us listeners don't know enough about what that means. Once you've won Miss England, what does that look like?
Yes. So, the best thing about my particular experience has been, as compared to some of the other misses that I know through Miss World, is how much autonomy I've had over my journey. I remember winning the contest, and as I say, I had work the next day. And my biggest worry was, will I be able to go to my first day at work? Because that's a very scary thought, missing your first day at work and, you know, m- creating a bad impression with your work colleagues and your bosses and things like that. And I remember backstage, the Miss England director, she said, yes, absolutely. And she said, you don't have to quit your work. You don't have to change anything. This is your journey. You do with it what you want to do. And I got the choice to sort of really veer this whole journey in the direction I wanted it to. At the point where I wanted to take time off work to prepare for Miss World, I had full support from the Miss England team, and equally from my medical colleagues. And I wanted to represent Diabetes UK and start a health education campaign for my project. I got full autonomy over my choice of charity I wanted to support, how I wanted to execute it, everything. So, and then of course, after Miss World, I got quite a few travel opportunities. And I basically had a plan. If COVID-19 wasn't going to happen, I had been invited by several different charities to visit several different countries, of which I've already visited Africa, Turkey, India, and then we had Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, and several other countries, all lined up for the rest of the year. And it's not very usual for Miss England to basically spend almost half a reign outside of the country doing work and humanitarian work, not even in England. But I got full support with that, that at the end of the day, this was my year. And however I wanted to, utilize this time, I got full capacity to do that. Um, and yes, I was in India recently, and we did quite a lot of humanitarian work in India, up until the point where the lockdown happened and I got stranded there. Um, and in fact, it was a very strange coincidence of unconscious bias that helped me back out of that country rather quickly, actually. Would you like me to talk about that?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Um, Sorry, one second. Yes, so essentially, I got stranded during the lockdown period, and being Miss England, my I had I had a little bit of an extra advantage that I could put my story out there to the media. So I did, and the Miss England team helped me with this. And within a week, the British Embassy had picked up this story, and they were trying to get me on a flight. This was a special flight, which was mainly for the German nationals, and a very few, there was a handful of British citizens who had managed to also get on this flight. But they got me on that flight really quickly. Within the space of a couple of days, they had secured me a position on this flight. And it was a lot easier for me because someone else organized it for me. I didn't even have to reach out to the British Embassy. They had seen my story, and they knew that I was a doctor and Miss England, and in a way, a public figure. So they had gone ahead and done this for me. On the other hand, my mom, even though I flagged it up that my mom also needed to get out of the country, she was stranded in Delhi. She had to wait 3 weeks before she could get a flight. I had to wait 1 week, you see. And she had to actually physically, keep messaging and emailing them and following the page, which was giving, directions for how to get on a flight and things like that. So for her, she didn't get the same sort of help in a way that I got. And I wonder if a part of that is because, I'm a beauty queen and a doctor, and I was appealing to the government that I want to return to work when I get back home. So yeah, that was an
Yes,
active example,
that
I
that
feel.
is an active example of unconscious bias. Unconsciously, implicitly, you were more important than your mother. Let's face it. But I mean, I wish we had lots and lots of time because I bet you have many, many stories you can share with us, Pasha. But you have had many experiences, lots of reflection because that's just the kind of person you are. What kind of top tips or learning have you given yourself, and you can maybe give us too, on how do you handle your unconscious biases?
I think the biggest takeaway I've had is to not let it affect your actions. Of course, some of your behaviors might be affected, and the way you handle a situation might be affected by the unconscious bias, because at the end of the day it is unconscious. But as I say, for Miss England, my biggest learning was that I was nearly not going to take part in that competition. I nearly quit because I got told that I'm Asian, so I will definitely have a reduced chance of winning it. And for the whole competition, I kept feeling, should I even bother to work as hard or anything like that? And I believe that I could have even worked harder if I really wanted to. But the thing is that I didn't quit, and I still went ahead with it, and I still put my best foot forward in the best way that I could. And this is something that I try to practice in everyday life. So I've been a model for 8 years, and of course, sometimes you'd get um, the budget of a shoot might be a lot less than other times, and some people that I used to work with, they would put a lot less effort into those shoots. And, I never approached it that way. I knew that for me, I was representing my brand. It didn't matter what the budget of the shoot was, how good the photographer or the videographer was. I needed to set my standard and keep working at that same level, regardless of that. So I try to, as much as I can, minimalize my actions based on my unconscious bias, especially in the experiences I've had. So I'd say the same for others. Actually, sometimes you might assume that something's going to be a certain way, and you might decide not to put in so much effort for that, or however you decide to act. Just take a step back and just pretend you didn't know that information, that you've just allowed to affect your behavior, and do as you would have done if you didn't know anything about what you know now. That's what I would say. I don't
Oh,
know if that
that's
makes sense.
excellent, excellent advice. Two things there: self-belief, and of course, not allowing your unconscious bias to kick in to think that that's not as good as the other. Extremely good advice, that I think all of us should wisely listen to and try and follow. Dr. Bhasha Mukherjee, Miss England, all the very best. Good luck for the NHS work that I know you are carrying through. Thank you from all of us for being there to take care of us and our health and our worries while this COVID epidemic is going on. And you are one of the people we all clap to at 8 p.m. On a weekday evening
Thank you.
in the United Kingdom. So thank you for that. And of course, thank you so very much for having this conversation with me on the unconscious bias.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my podcast, Stories of Unconscious Bias. If you enjoyed hearing this episode, do tune in every Saturday for a new interview. And if you could share, leave a review and rating, that would be hugely appreciated. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Smita Tharoor, and feel free to suggest new guests. Until next week.